In 1554, on a misty morning under a heavy gray sky, the Spanish royal ship sailed through the choppy waters of the Mystery of the Ladies. Drawing closer to the shores of England, on the deck stood Philip II, Crown Prince of Spain. His dark cloak billowed in the biting wind, and his sharp gaze was fixed on the faint outline of land on the horizon. Beyond lay England, a kingdom in the throes of religious turmoil. Philip was not coming for love but for duty. His marriage to Mary I was a political maneuver to bolster Catholicism against the rising tide of Protestantism. Beneath the resolute exterior of a seasoned statesman, Philip carried the weight of uncertainty. Memories of Maria, his first wife, still lingered in his mind. Her loss had left a deep wound that he never allowed others to see. Now, on the brink of a new marriage, Philip felt a hollow apprehension. The portrait of Mary he had received before his journey, a woman nearing 40. Her face marked by the pressures of the crown, stirred little optimism. Yet, as a prince and politician, he knew personal feelings had no place in matters that determined the fate of nations. The ship docked at Southampton amidst a lavish yet cautious reception from the English populace. Carriages carrying Philip and his retinue, adorned in gold and crimson velvet, rolled through crowded streets. Flags bearing the symbols of Spain and England fluttered in the cold wind. Philip maintained his composed demeanor, his eyes carefully scanning the faces of those gathered to witness his arrival. Mary I, Queen of England, stood under a gleaming golden canopy in a grand square, ready to welcome her future husband. She wore a rich crimson velvet gown trimmed with gold lace and diamonds. Her face radiated hope but also betrayed a trace of anxiety. She had long heard of Philip, a disciplined, cold, but ambitious man. When their eyes met, Mary offered a warm smile, while Philip responded with a slight nod. It was a distant beginning, but Mary consoled herself with the thought that love could blossom over time. The wedding was held at Winchester Cathedral in an atmosphere of solemnity and grandeur. The sound of church bells echoed through the streets, while inside, countless candles illuminated the ancient stone walls. Mary entered the cathedral clutching a rosary, her face filled with hope. Philip, clad in a black robe embroidered with silver, awaited her at the altar. As they exchanged vows, Mary gazed at Philip, searching for a flicker of warmth in his eyes. But his gaze remained steady, calm, as though this were merely another step in a grand political strategy. Following the ceremony, a lavish banquet extended late into the night. Nobles from across Europe gathered to toast the royal couple. Mary spent the evening trying to engage Philip, but his distant demeanor left her disheartened. Will he ever love me? Mary wondered as she watched Philip converse with his advisors rather than with her. Life after the wedding quickly became a challenge for Mary. She had hoped Philip would be a companion, a husband who would share her joys and sorrows. Instead, Philip, consumed by the demands of statecraft and his vision for Spain's expanding influence, was often absent. Even when he stayed in England, their conversations rarely ventured beyond matters of politics. She received polite smiles and nods, but little of the affection she so deeply craved. In her loneliness, Mary sought solace in her faith. She spent hours praying in her private chapel, lighting candles and pleading with God to grant her a child. To her, bearing an heir was not only a queen's duty, but a means to secure England's future as a Catholic stronghold. In 1555, Mary believed she was finally pregnant. The news sent waves of excitement through the courts of England and Spain. Celebrations were held, and the entire kingdom awaited the birth of a royal heir. Filled with joy, Mary began preparing for the child's arrival, from appointing caretakers to planning a grand christening ceremony. But as months passed, her body showed no signs of pregnancy. The court physicians grew increasingly concerned, and rumors began to spread that Mary was not with child. Confronted with this devastating truth, Mary fell into despair. For her, the absence of an heir was not just a personal failure, but a failure as queen and wife. Realizing that her hopes had been an illusion, Mary secluded herself in her chambers for days, refusing to see anyone. Philip, who had already returned to Spain, received a tearful letter from Mary. She wrote, "Am I unworthy of God's blessings? I have failed, not only as a queen but as a wife." Philip, as usual, responded with a brief and impersonal note. "Remain steadfast in your faith, for Catholicism will endure." Yet these words did little to comfort Mary's anguish. After the failed pregnancy, Philip spent even less time in England. He felt out of place in its damp climate and among its skeptical nobility, who often regarded him with suspicion. Left behind, Mary sank deeper into isolation. She wrote to Philip almost daily, some letters filled with declarations of love, others with desperate pleas for his return. Most of these letters went unanswered. In one particularly heartfelt letter, Mary wrote, "My dearest husband, I live in shadows without you. Your absence is a wound that no healer can mend." Philip, upon receiving the letter, skimmed its contents before turning back to his political affairs. By 1558, Mary had fallen gravely ill. She spent her final days in a dimly lit chamber, the flickering candles casting long shadows on the walls. Philip, by then in Brussels, was occupied with negotiations. When news of Mary's dire condition reached him, he paused briefly before resuming his work. Mary, sensing the end was near, dictated one last letter to Philip. In it, she wrote, "I loved you with all that I am, though perhaps I was never meant to be loved in return. May God grant you peace and wisdom in your reign." She passed away shortly thereafter, leaving the crown to her half-sister, Elisabeth I. When the letter reached Philip, he read it silently. Those present noted the slight tremor in his hands as he folded the parchment. "A queen is gone, but the faith remains," he said, his voice steady yet distant. That night, alone in his chamber, he placed Mary's letter in a wooden box that held mementos of his past. Whether he mourned her or simply reflected on the political ramifications of her death, no one could say. The marriage between Philip and Mary was one of duty, not love. For Mary, it was a bitter chapter of unreciprocated devotion, a queen who gave everything to a husband and a faith that never fully returned her sacrifices. For Philip, it was a reminder that power often comes with loss, a union forged in strategy but overshadowed by the loneliness of two hearts that never truly connected.